Tulsi Bagnoli, India, Tapurar Pode Gauma, Shukurai Maruhaba. Tulsi Bagnoli, India, Tapurar Pode Gauma, Shukurai.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the One Sacred Pause podcast. I'm your host, Jessica, and today I am speaking with a fourth generation meditator and a Vedic scientist. And I'm so excited to welcome Tulsi Bagnoli onto the podcast. So, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute joy.
Yay. I know. I just am so excited to have you on because I've been following you on Instagram for a little bit, and I love Jyotish. I love Vedic science. I love talking about the science and the art and everything that goes into it. And in particular, how we can then use this information and how it can inform our life, and in particular, inform our life as modern yogis. So, can you maybe start off and just tell us a little bit about your background? Because it's so interesting.
Absolutely. So I was born into a family of yogis, one could say. I was born in the Midwest, where there is a community of around 5,000 meditators. And so I grew up with my parents meditating twice a day, kind of in an atmosphere of mantra, meditation, yoga, Ayurvedic cooking. Then I went to Maharishi School of the Age of Enlightenment growing up, where we did yoga and meditated twice a day. We would chant Sanskrit and learn about Ayurveda and all of the Vedic sciences since I was very young. And so I was really steeped in that. And the beautiful thing for me, it was an international community. So I grew up with the background of all the different cultures and religions, and all of that was celebrated equally. So it was a beautiful environment, I think, for a child to grow up in. And I feel very grateful for that.
Sign me up. I want to go back in time and I want to be a member of your family. That's so phenomenal. And so, are your parents still there then, or have they left?
My mother still lives there, and I have maybe 8 immediate family members. My little sister just moved back from New York because of the pandemic and kind of has taken root there and is really thriving. So that's been sweet to witness.
And is she also kind of continuing on in the family tradition of really centering their life around these practices?
She does meditate twice a day, and she's taken the more, let's take this knowledge and turn it into enjoying 200% of life. She went to school for event planning and event decor. So she embodies it, but it's not her mission to share that knowledge.
That's so cool. And that's always a topic that comes up a lot, like in the teacher trainings that I facilitate, and just in having conversations with other yogis and meditators and Ayurvedic practitioners or enthusiasts, is oftentimes when you find yourself on this path, if you weren't raised in the type of environment that you were, if you find this in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s even, and then all of a sudden you start to notice these changes within your life because you are now on this path that is lighting you up from the inside out. And sometimes people around us, our family members, maybe even our partner, often they don't always agree, they don't always understand. And so I get that question all the time, like, okay, I love yoga, I love what I'm doing, but my family doesn't agree. And so I think that's a really interesting, that's why I wanted to ask you about your sister, is because I can imagine when you guys became adults and you started to leave the nest, that it would go one of two ways. Either you stay on the path or you perhaps outgrow it in some fashion. So that's really cool that she's still enjoying that and doing a dedicated meditation practice.
Absolutely. She's such a beautiful example for me, because I went 200% in after my journey of exploring everything, and it's so beautiful to see her having embodied it and living a very Western life.
Yeah.
I think she'd call herself a modern yogi, even though she meditates twice a day.
Yeah. And are you doing the transcendental meditation? Or are you doing Vedic meditation? Or what's your meditation practice look like?
Yeah, so I do transcendental meditation. I've been practicing for 31 years now.
Wow.
And since 2004, I became a Siddha, which is really adding this in-depth practice on top of TM. It's the advanced meditation practices. So it lengthened my practice from the 20 minutes twice a day.
Wow. So how long is it now each day?
Well, I don't do my full practice in university. My full practice is about 4 hours twice a day.
Oh, wow. So 8 hours total.
Yes, and ironically, I look back and I think I accomplished more and actually did more with a little more ease and grace meditating that much in the day. And now I've really dedicated my life to service, and I also, live outside of Los Angeles, so I'm driving a lot, so I'm not afforded that much time to meditate at the moment.
Hmm. So how long did you have that big meditation practice for?
I'd say for about 5 years.
Wow.
Yes.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah, and even at one point they have a program to create world peace where they talk about the unified field and groups of meditators getting together to
Yes.
shift global consciousness. So at one
Mhm.
time I was a professional meditator, actually meditating for maybe even more than 8 hours in a group of people to create a positive effect in global consciousness.
That's probably the coolest thing I've ever heard. I am so impressed and just like I didn't know that that was a possibility. So were you getting paid to do that or was there some sort of energetic exchange?
Yeah, there was a grant program from a gentleman and his wife to support these groups of meditators, and it might even still be going today. I'm not quite sure with the pandemic because the whole
Mm,
idea is to be in a group.
right.
Meditating at the same time still has an effect, but it went on for at least 10 years.
That's
So,
amazing.
yeah.
That's what we need. That's what we need. Absolutely. Oh my God. And so then when you left that, was that a shock to your system or did you feel and you were no longer able to dedicate that amount of time to your meditation practice and you're kind of stepping back into the role more of a householder perhaps? Did you have any sort of a problem or a challenge with stepping away from that practice?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I don't know if anyone's ever kind of asked me about that. I think it was very confronting in a way because when you are used to a certain amount of rest
Mm,
and consciousness and functioning with effortless ease, you don't really notice until it's been diminished or gone. And so absolutely I stepped into kind of something that wasn't my dharma. I started learning about biointensive gardening. I felt so drawn to the earth. I wanted to learn how to do sustainable farming, and I got hired to manage a garden. And so I was working 10-hour days in the earth with my hands, and it was beautiful. And I did notice that contrast. It was very stark,
yeah.
and I felt like I was missing something. And part of my practice was it's not about the meditation, right? It's about the 23 other hours of the day or whatever amount you meditate for to be established in the self. So I said, okay, here's your establish yourself in being and then go out into action and be of service.
Mm.
But I do long for that that deeper dive.
Well, that was the first thing that came to my mind was how beautiful that is, but then also I can imagine when you've been conditioned, especially over years, to be so introspective and so quiet and really cutting off the sensory perceptions that are coming in from the outside world. And then all of a sudden you step out into the quote unquote regular world. And now all your senses are bombarded, they're on overdrive. And I can imagine that for me, I feel having, of course, not been in your situation, but I can imagine that would be really, it could be very overwhelming where you're just like, oh my God, it's too much. It's too much.
There was definitely some stumbling and learning involved.
Yeah.
But I think that's a part of it. I truly believe that service is joy, and
Mm.
we're not here just to meditate. I could have picked that path, but I do know I'm a householder. I do know that I get so much joy sharing these practices with others. So it equally lights me up to be of service in that way.
Yeah. And maybe, I guess, too, the other thing would be the residual effect of having meditated so intensely for so long, that even if there was kind of that learning curve coming back into the other parts of the world, that maybe it was cushioned a little bit or buffered a little bit by the fact that you had been so deeply seated into your own consciousness. And I think that's kind of a cool thing to think about too.
Absolutely. Yeah, the more we meditate and move into action, the more we actually integrate that awareness into our being, and then it's maintained. So
Mm.
definitely.
And so it seems like a passion of yours also is working with the Vedic astrology and Jyotish. And that's actually how I had come across you, was because you were presenting a workshop, I think, on it in LA. And I was wondering if maybe you could just start, first of all, explaining what this is, and then move into sharing what you do with it.
Beautiful. I think Jyotish is probably my favorite topic of all time.
Mm.
So Jyotish is the sister science of yoga and Ayurveda. And in the Vedic sciences, we have limbs of the Veda, and Jyotish, or what we modernly call this practice is Vedic astrology, is really the eyes of the Veda. It's that all-knowing quality. It's the science of light, and really utilizing the fixed stars as a treasure map that can ultimately guide us back to ourselves. And so this ancient science is offering a blueprint at the time of our birth that we can glimpse at and look at. And then there's the transits of the planets and the cycles. There's so many layers and depths. It's gotten to the point where someone says, "Oh, my son's this, tell me something about me," to where I can't even almost say anything. It's like the wholeness is truly greater than the sum of the parts. And so this this science is a complement to yoga and Ayurveda. Actually, in the ancient days, a Jyotishi would also be a master in Ayurveda and yoga, because they're all complementing each other. If someone comes with an illness, we would take their pulse and look into their dietary and seasonal and daily routine. But then we'd also say, oh, is this planetary? Is this karma? Is this something
Mm.
that we need to come at from a different angle than your routine? We don't know where the karma is coming from, because karma is unfathomable.
Mhm.
And so kind of working with the individual on all these different layers.
Well, I know for me, the first time I had a reading was, God, probably 14 years ago or so. And it completely, I mean, it blew my mind, because I was actually, um, it, scared's not the right word. It, shocked. I don't know. I was in awe. That's the right expression. I was in awe of what I had been told about who I was and my path. And the reason I was so almost scared was because it was so accurate. And I was like, oh my gosh, how is this possible that there's this tool based on just my birth and the place of birth and the time of birth that can really define me and me as an individual, and me with all of the permeations and who I am and my personality and every experience I'm bringing to the table. And it, I had such a good experience with it that it really fueled my continued interest in yoga and Ayurveda. And to this day, I've had many readings since. And the most recent reading, which was so fun, was I had a baby 8 months ago, and I had a reading for both my son and me. And that is also just so cool, in order to kind of at least a little bit make sense of like, oh, okay, how is this relationship going to look karmically speaking? How is his journey perhaps going to be unfolding in some big ways? Not in, I mean, the other thing that really struck me with Vedic astrology is that it goes on and on and on. So if you get your chart read, I've only skimmed the surface with the chart, the masters that I've gone to who've read my chart. Because I know then you can go back and you can go look in each area of your life, your relationship, your family, your work life. And then in each one of those, you can get even more specialized and more specialized with what's the auspicious day, what's the day to avoid, and business dealing. And then, if you bring in like the Vastu and all the other things, I mean, I can't, the ability that you have had, or I guess the opportunity that you've had to really devote yourself to this science is just awesome. It's so cool. What do you work with clients on an ongoing basis, or do you typically have people come to you for like a single reading?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's whenever questions come, sometimes I always feel like backing up a whole bunch, if you don't mind, just
Of
because
course.
the way that you found me, it's really beautiful. That Aloe Yoga was my first public event on Vedic astrology. And I am a second generation Vedic astrologer. And as you were sharing with me, it's interesting. My father's an international Jyotishi, so he mostly works with clients in Europe, and Norway was one of his places. So I might have to ask
Okay.
if you had a reading from my father.
I haven't, but I want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have different last names, so you may not know if you have.
Okay. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I haven't.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And so I grew up hearing the mythology and the stories and having him point to the stars. And I think one of my very earliest memories is actually him making a stamped hand chart in the 80s, So
Wow.
I started looking at charts in university. Just I don't even know how it happened or how people knew that I could look at charts, or how I even knew that I could look at charts, but people would ask me, to the point where it transformed into, can I buy you lunch? Can I give you a donation? And I'd been looking at charts for, I don't even know for how long, more than a decade, and didn't feel qualified to be a public Vedic astrologer, to
Mm.
say that that's what I did, because I know it's such a sacred science and a light that needs to be respected and tended to. And my dear friend at Aloe Yoga asked me to do a meditation class at Aloe Yoga in Santa Monica. And then she's like, that was so great. Let's do another one. What's your favorite topic?
Mm.
And I said, Vedic astrology. And she said, all right, let's go. And there was 54 people that showed up. And from that day forward, I had 1 to 8 clients per week without advertising, all referral basis. And it took every ounce of courage to step up and say, yes, I'm a humble student of this practice, and to realize that I can help people and that there is people who know less than I do on this topic. And so my purpose is to have clients with this science be self-sufficient. So I do have some clients who say, let's check in every month. And I say, give it a couple months. Why don't you digest that? Of course, I love returning clients, but I also want it to be useful for them and them to learn and integrate. So I do have a handful of clients I see once a month or a few times a year, or ones that come every birthday. Most people I see once and have a big deep dive, and then I might do one follow-up to kind of digest and integrate. That's a more common way of connecting with people. I think my greatest joy is working with this whole story. Obviously, you can't cover that in an hour or an hour and a half, but my aim is so that clients can meet with a little more joy and less resistance in learning what wants to be tended to and grown in this moment.
Mm.
And of course, I project into the future to some extent. So.
Oh, that's beautiful. Do you, let me ask this a different way. Can you maybe, because of course this is like, there's so much to be said on this topic that it's really hard to even pick what direction to go on this podcast. But I'm wondering if maybe you could give an explanation or an overview of some of the universal principles or the common periods that you might see in anybody's chart.
Yeah, great question. And it's just to share too, this is a language, and this language is different than the tropical zodiac. And so with the tropical zodiac, we're working with the seasons and with the Gregorian calendar. And in sidereal astrology, we're working with the fixed position of the stars, which is very like we can calculate that. Like you said, in 2000 years, I could say, all right, on this date, when you look up, Venus is gonna all of a sudden appear as the evening star, you know? And so with that said, the foundation of Vedic astrology for me is the 27 constellations beneath the 12 zodiac. And so we're very familiar with that 12 zodiac. For me, the constellations, which we call nakshatras, all have this beautiful mythology and story that's interacting with each of the planets, but specifically the moon, because they're the lunar mansion. And so the way that one thinks, is motivated towards one thing or wants to resist something else, and the way they emotionally connect with the world is based off of their moon nakshatra. And so this deep dive says, oh, okay, you know, moon in Aries is like saying, I live in California. And it's like, well, I'm actually trying to locate you. Where in California do you live? You know, and it's like, oh, I live in Topanga Canyon. That's like saying the nakshatra of Ashwini, which is the very first nakshatra in this age. And that's a whole different story. And within that, there's 4 padas. And multiplying that by 27 is how we get to 108. Not to lose you on mathematics, but versus the 12 zodiac system, we're working with 108 options with each of the planets. And so that to me is one aspect, one angle that's very pronounced. Someone will even say, oh, my Mars is in Cancer, tell me about that. And I've gotten to the point where it's like, gosh, I could share a couple things, but I need to look at the nakshatra and the house and who's it's with and who's looking at it and what cycle are you in? So something that's very specific to Vedic astrology is the dasha period. It's the full cycle of the Vedic lifespan, which is 120 years. And that's our projected lifespan. It's always in the same order based on the planets, but depending when you're born, it's initiated at a certain time. So there's the 7 main planets along the 2 lunar nodes. So I'm in my north node cycle. So this is offering a flavor or a season that's within the transits of the planets and my original birth chart. So I feel like I could just keep talking. I think maybe I'll offer that chunk.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing, is it's complicated. And you know, that's why you got your master's degree in this science. And people, when I talk to them about this, are always just like so amazed, and they're like, oh my God, you can get your, especially in the West, where our exposure to yoga and Ayurveda and meditation is reserved for certain pockets or populations, I think. And the overall impression that we've been exposed to is very commercialized and very watered down to some degree. And so when I share about my experiences with Vedic astrology, and or that's even a thing, people are just amazed. They're like, whoa, tell me more. What's this all about? And I'm like, well, I can only share a little bit because I haven't studied it. But when somebody has studied it, it's a science. It's math and science, and it's calculated and it's precise. And you can get your master's degree in Western universities in this art and science. And that's what I think is really surprising to people, because I mean, so many areas of science, modern science, have proven what the yogis have known for centuries. And this is like if we're talking about neuroscience, or we're talking about physics, or we're talking about, I'm trying to think, I worked with a yoga teacher who was not a rocket scientist, but something crazy like that. And she's a yoga teacher now. And it's all of the science is proving exactly what yoga teaches, what Ayurveda teaches. And it's so cool, because sometimes we need to have that language, or that concept of like, oh, you can get a master's degree in this, and it's just science and it's just math. So you got your master's degree in this, which is awesome. What was that like?
Oh my goodness. Well, I did my BA and my master's because I actually reluctantly went back to my region of birth in the Midwest after being in a car accident. I was living in Hawaii, and my mom said, "Come back and just take rest." I said, "Okay, just for 2 weeks. I have a mission. I'm going to save the surf reefs of Hawaii."
Hmm.
And I remember just resting, and my mom said, "Hey, you know, Maharishi University is about to start. Why don't you just sample it?" And the beautiful thing about this university, I'm not sure if I could have done university any other way or in any other topic. It's in the block system. So
Hmm.
it's month by month. You do math for 1 month and you're done. So my mom said, take the intro class that all the students take, Science of Creative Intelligence, where we do talk about quantum physics or the unified field, how everything is connected. It's so beautiful how it's all backed by science. And I remember sitting there kind of grouchy because I just got stripped from my dream life in Hawaii and awakened to my own reality, which I hadn't been tending to properly, and slowly got completely hooked. I
Hmm.
took the first class and was like, all right, okay, which was so good for me because being raised in that environment, that bubble, and then moving into the relative world, you know, of Hawaii, right? The epitome of beauty in the relative world, to saying, oh, you have this nature inside and you haven't been tending to it. And then the second class, I said, oh, maybe I'll stay for one more month. Maybe I'll stay for one more month, but I'm only going to take the classes I want to take.
Hmm.
So I'd take the Bhagavad Gita, I'd take Sanskrit chanting, Ayurveda, Jyotish. I was taking all these beautiful, rich classes, and 2 weeks turned into 5 years. I became a teacher of yoga, of transcendental meditation, and just fully committed and went
Hmm.
all the way in. And it was magical. Our classrooms were Vastu,
Hmm.
which is architecture in line with nature. Right? We got credit for doing yoga and meditation every day. We had organic vegetarian food. There was a rich culture of 70 different countries at my university. So it felt like this Vedic global community steeped in this ancient wisdom, which
Hmm.
is just so almost ironic that it's placed in the Midwest. And I look back on those days and I don't want to be nostalgic or miss those days because I can recreate that here, and that's what my job is. I
Hmm.
could stay there and bask in that for the rest of time, but I know my job is to take that light and kind of pull it and shine it for those who aren't aware of it.
Hmm.
But it was a pretty magical 5 year period of my life.
That's so cool. So then what are you doing? You know, the thing at Allo wasn't that long ago. Are
Exactly.
you now looking towards how you can be of service in a more tangible way, in terms of now you've seen that people are really hungry for this information, and they want to come see you and they want to come learn from you? Are you expanding out in other ways, or are you kind of just keeping it like referral only?
Well, I've been asked for maybe 7 years to do videos and got inspired to on the full moon. I did my first Instagram live, and I'm slowly moving out. I am a projector in human design. I
Me
don't
too.
know if you've heard of
Mhm.
this. Oh, I had a feeling, actually. That's so sweet. And as you know, we're not, I don't want to say we're not energy people, but we're not doers. We're kind of the light. And
Mhm.
so, as much as I'm like, all right, let's do videos and articles and classes, I only have a certain amount of capacity. You know, I have an amazing capacity to show up and share, but to organize and do these fixed things, I can only do a little bit at a time. So for the past few years, I've been writing articles on the new moon and the full moon to share that information. I've been holding new moon and full moon women's circles, which have now moved to Zoom. And you had asked me at the beginning, I haven't set the date. I'm thinking the end of March, beginning of April, to offer an online intro to Vedic astrology and Vedic philosophy. I've given maybe 10 of those, since aloe, which were always well received and just lit me up. I even gave a weekly class on Vedic astrology at a meditation studio right up until right before the pandemic, which was just so magical for me. It feels like I could just do that for the rest of time. So I have made Vedic astrology my main offering. I still teach yoga and meditation almost every day. But I would like to take it deeper. I would like to share that with people because it's such a resource to know yourself.
100%. I mean, it can almost feel overwhelming, but then it also is so exciting, and just again, one more way in which we view our inner world and how it's reflected into our outer world. And I would feel so sad if I didn't have access to these tools, and if I didn't know that there was another way to live my life beyond kind of what the Western prescription is, which is, go to school, get a good job, get married, have kids, climb the corporate ladder, pay your taxes, and then you die.
Yeah.
And I just, for me, that was really, I didn't come from the same background you did, although my mom has done yoga for a lot longer than I have. And I was exposed to some other, I think, ways of thinking, but I was still raised in a pretty conventional household in terms of what general society in the US looks like. And when I started to explore, well, before that, I always felt so confined and so like, this isn't me, and lost, because there's a big disconnect when we feel this isn't me, this isn't my life. Why is it going this way? It doesn't feel true, but we don't know what's beyond the other side, and we don't know where to look even for answers. And for me, as soon as I found yoga, and I actually started with the philosophy first, not the asana, which is kind of an interesting turn of events. All of a sudden I was like, oh, my life makes sense. Oh my God, there's a name for what I'm feeling. There's a path and a way to study and learn, and tools and a blueprint. And it was, I mean, truly life changing, and continues to be every single day. So I just wonder, like, the people that you come into contact with and your clients, are they coming from, have they had a lot of exposure to this stuff before? Or is this kind of, I mean, you're in Topanga, you're close to LA, so that's a pretty amazing place to be in if you're studying yoga and Ayurveda. But are they used to it? Are they kind of new to it? What do you see?
I see a little bit of everything actually. Since I have been mostly, I think all referral basis. I have a client on Monday who I don't know who she is, and she didn't say she was referred by anyone. So I get those, I don't want to say rare, but Instagram, people who are like, hey, I'm booking a reading. And that's always fun too. It's like, oh, cool. My posts are reaching a little farther than my circle. I think 1 in 5 people they don't even know what astrology is. They've never had an astrology reading. They don't know what yoga is. There's some CEO in a company, or, a housewife, like that. And then half are usually practitioners or teachers, like super steeped in it. And then there's, the in between, who just want to know a little bit more. They had a few readings, and but I think since my hub for the past 4 years has been LA, and my practice really initiated in big way with aloe yoga, so I think most are teachers and students who have had multiple readings. Usually I'm the first Vedic reading for most people, probably 90% of people. But it's also fun too, that 10% is like, wow, you do that really differently. Like, oh, I love that you have your own angle. I think a lot of people learn from one teacher and they do it just like that. And for me, I feel like I like to take 80% intuition, 20% what I've learned, the science, and just really steep in the fixed mathematics of it. And then really let that go and allow the story to reveal itself, because it is a story and it is alive,
That's so neat. Yeah, well, and that's a really good point too. I know I've tried to have readings with a lot of different practitioners, just because then of course you're always going to hear something new anyways, but it's also a little bit through the lens of the person reading your chart. and what they can see or what they pick up on, or more importantly, what they choose to share with you
Okay.
because they see so much. And, you know,
Mm,
I just want to share two fun stories with
please.
my experience. And one was the very first reading I had that I was like 14 years ago. Um, the the man told me, among many, I mean, one thing he told me, two things. One of them he told me was so crazy. And at the time I was like, I just don't know how this makes any sense. But he said that I would be a successful business owner in Europe. And I
Oh,
was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't want to have a business. I was working in corporate law at the time, and I had no connection to anywhere in Europe. And then now I live in Norway and I run my own business and have here for the last 5 years. So it's like so crazy. I actually had forgotten that. And then I found an old notebook like a year and a
huh.
half ago where I'd written my notes from the reading. And I was like, oh my God, that's so nuts. He also told me that I'm not very musical. I don't have a good sense of rhythm. I can't hear tones.
Mm.
And he said that there is a musical instrument that I'm going to excel at playing. I was like, and so to this day, I've been like, where is it? What is it? I haven't found it yet.
Oh, I'm excited to hear your music.
I don't know. I mean, every new instrument I come across, I'm like, oh, is it the harmonium? Nope. Is it the Shruti box? No, not really. And you know, of course, I've already ruled out the piano and the guitar and but so I don't know what it is. But the other fun thing was my husband and I, we got married in 2014 and in the summer, and it was like 3 days before our wedding. And my Ayurveda teacher, who I dearly, dearly love and admire, she had brought one of her gurus from India to the town we were living in. And so, and he was giving readings. And so the day before or 3 days before my wedding, when of course we have all these expenses and all these things that I really needed to be like spending money mindfully on, we didn't have a lot of money. And the reading was very expensive, more expensive. You know, a normal reading I would say is in the $200 range, a little below, maybe a little more, depending on how long it is. And this was very expensive. I mean, I think it was closer to $300 for an hour. And because my teacher had brought him, and I was like, oh my God, I have to do this. And my husband was like, Jessica, we have a wedding. We need to use this money for something else. And he's like, it's $300. That's so much money. I was like, I know, but he's only going to be here for the short time. I don't know when I'll get to see him again. I have to get a reading. And so it kind of cracks me up that was my priority, not my wedding, but getting a Vedic astrology reading from this guy. So just, you know, that's for me just a testament to how powerful these practices and tools are, because we all know that when we're able to have a more intentional viewpoint of our inner landscape, guess what? We feel happier, we feel healthier, we feel more grounded, we feel more connected, we feel more inspired. And that's a big part of this too, I think, is prioritizing our practices and
Mm.
prioritizing our connection to our network. When you are in LA, although you're in Topanga, which from my understanding is kind of a different vibe from LA in general, do you see how people get caught up in more of the commercialized versions of these practices? Or are you pretty much isolated or connected to people who are really living them?
Mm. I can almost say that I watch my own ego get caught up in it. Not in a big way, but it doesn't turn into an action or words. But here, there's so much that's being commercialized because a lot of people say, you know, you're in LA for a reason. You know, that which happens in LA kind of ripples to the world.
So true.
And, you know, I live in the woods. I live 10 minutes off of a main road. It was never paved until 2 years ago, actually. And the only way I think I could live in LA, at least for the moment, is in nature because there is so much that's presented for the masses. And I
Mm.
think that's beautiful because we can only learn or receive from our own state of consciousness, and the teacher can only teach from their state of consciousness, right? So knowledge is different in different states. And if we just kind of went, you know, came right out of the, you know, I forget the terminology, but if we just started with deep philosophical, you know, tantric Sankhya philosophy, we'd lose most people.
Yeah.
And so you have to start from the beginning. It's best to start slowly. Most people come from a physical asana practice saying, I'm here because I need to get into shape. I want to be flexible. And then it's just a little bit at a time. So I think I run into that a lot, actually, this commercialized, and then the other side of the coin, the beautiful, deeply steeped teachers who no one knows about, who just live the practice. And if you want to find them, you just run into them, at the local coffee shop or something. So,
Which is so cool. I mean, I've talked about this a lot, and of course you wouldn't have known this, but in Norway, it's such an interesting time to be here and to be a teacher and a practitioner of yoga and Ayurveda, because it's so much newer here. There's not that same exposure that we're used to in the US, let alone the type of exposure you might find in LA or maybe a Boulder or something like that. And so it's people are so excited in Norway about yoga, and it's spreading, and people are asking questions, and they're getting more and more curious about this. And that's why when you were talking about offering your workshops online, I think that's such a cool thing. And I really hope you end up doing it, because you can reach such a broader audience. And especially the topic that you're talking about and teaching about is so specialized, and you don't just find somebody who can teach that on every street corner, at least here, certainly not in Norway. And I've talked a lot with the people on my team at the Atman Yoga School and other yoga teachers I know in the community here. And unfortunately, in Oslo and in other parts of Norway, I mean, we have just we've been in a lockdown, strict lockdown for 4 months already. And each week it's just stricter and stricter regulations. So we're unfortunately going the wrong way here. And gyms and yoga studios have been closed for about a year. So our yoga community is unfortunately starting to feel really heavy, because we can't meet in community. Everything's on Zoom, everything's online. And it's unfortunate, because then you lose so much from the community aspect, but also from the inspiration aspect. However, I bring this up because I think when a topic that's really intriguing, like Vedic astrology, is available, that will get people's attention. And they'll be like, oh, okay, I've been on Zoom already for 40 hours this week, and I don't care. I'll sign on for a workshop. I certainly would. I would love to learn from you. And yeah, that kind of comes back to the conversation too, of like, all right, we are householders. So that means we have to make money, and we have to survive in the very real, tangible world. And you seem to have really created a little nook for yourself, and crafted your life in a way that's very supportive and nourishing. But how do you think about your relationship with money from coming from a spiritual background? Because this is, I think, a very hot topic that I love to ask my guests about.
That's so beautiful. I think money is energy, and the relationship that we all have with it somehow reveals a deeper understanding of self-love and self-value. And I think one of my deeper lessons in this life has been around, I embodying my truth and who I am, while staying humble and stepping forth in that offering. And I believe I've been teaching yoga and meditation full time for about 16, 17 years, Jyotish full time a little more actively the past few years, but for more than a decade, kind of behind the scenes, I guess you could say. And I wholeheartedly believed in making what you love what you do. And I really lived hand to mouth. Honestly, it's like, okay, there's $100 left in my bank account, or $10 left, but I paid rent. I'm doing what I love. I might spend 4 hours in traffic and get paid $70 to teach at a very well-known company, but okay, it's on my resume. But last year something shifted. I said, this is all energy. And so what do you believe deep down? And I think deep down there was part of me that didn't believe that I could thrive in sharing these things, because I do believe that it's our birthright to have yoga and have meditation, and that these sciences in the olden days were, you might house a Brahmin pundit who's offering you a Jyotish reading and feed them. And we're here to enjoy 200% of life. So I think I did a lot of soul searching and deep diving last year, I think, for my lifetime. And I said, okay, let's switch this. Let's move into that abundance mindset, that fluidity, and something really shifted for me last year. So
That's amazing. That's so beautiful. And I mean, I think that's such a valuable lesson too, is that oftentimes the thing, I mean, money is such a sticky topic anyways, but the thing often that's holding us back from feeling secure and trusting that everything will unfold and we will be provided for, is just, of course, it's fear, but it's self-limiting beliefs. We're not worthy. Nobody's going to think we deserve it. There's all of these things. And oftentimes in the yoga community, people talk about imposter syndrome. And I know you had kind of touched on it earlier, not using those words, but kind of alluding to that idea of like, were you good enough? And I think every teacher, myself included, I mean, I didn't start teaching yoga until after I took my third yoga teacher training, because I didn't think I was good enough. and I was plenty good enough. It was just my own ego in a reverse manner of saying like, oh, I'm not good enough. I'll just keep playing small. I'll just keep, being a student. Well, of course, we're always students, but in the way of like, I'm only good enough to be a student and my voice isn't important and I don't deserve to be heard. And, all these things that aren't true for any of us, but they get in the way of our relationship with money in a very big way. And so I think that's really cool that you had this massive shift and transformation. And now you're able to sit on the other side a little bit and be like, wow, that worked.
yes. And then now more work is, it's like this continual process. It's like, okay, now what are these stories that you somehow are allowing to play in the background?
Yeah. And I think you also touched on it with keeping the humility of your offerings and being of service. And if that's the cornerstone of how and that's how I view my offerings as well. When you try to always keep that as the cornerstone or the guide for where you're going, I think that's a pretty safe way to at least help you stay within the lanes a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
I have one last question I want to ask you before we wrap up. And of course, this is a whole other topic, but I know people listening to this podcast are really curious about it. Can you talk a little bit about gemstones and how those relate to our birth chart and jewelry?
Lovely question. It's so fun that you brought that up, because ever since I was a kid, maybe not a kid, but 18 years old, that's when people would be like, "We look at my chart," and and somehow in my mind I wouldn't even think, but I'd be like, "Oh, I think you could be wearing a yellow sapphire right now," with no agenda of I know a gemstone dealer, or there's no back for me. Just it would kind of be information that would pop up for they may not even ask, and it's like I'm just seeing like, oh, do you own any emeralds? And oh yeah, actually I did buy an emerald. Oh, you should make that into a ring. That would be really beautiful for you. I feel like they're tools. I feel like they're not necessary. However, I do have an emerald ring myself that I got, I think, at 20 years old in university. It was a big investment, kind of like, I have no business buying a, multiple $1,000 ring, but I wholeheartedly believed and still believe that there's tools like yagyas and gemstones and any tool really that can help us align with nature's cycles and ultimately align with ourselves is going to make life a little smoother, more effortless, more shiny, more engaged. And so the system that I grew up with, the approach that I come from, is that whatever you enhance is going to enhance both the negative and positive qualities. So for me with gemstones, I like to enhance the positive.
Mm.
And if something is really positive, just, just knowing that all the angles of that can come. So I think it's something we don't want to just ask anyone about, or you know go in our, especially with bigger stones. Like blue sapphire is actually a touchy subject. I don't actually personally recommend those ever.
Mm.
That one's one that I like to kind of deep dive a little bit more into someone's chart before having that conversation. But I think they're absolutely useful. I think it's something you really want to take your time with. But when something is in alignment, it's like I met this woman, and I just about a week ago, and I'm like, is that an astrological emerald? And she's like, what's that? I go, I swear you are Gemini rising, and that's probably a really good ring for you. And not only was she Gemini rising, but she is in a Mercury cycle and has Mercury in her first house in Gemini. So it was just, I mean, that means probably nothing to most people, but for me, it was like, if I was giving you an astrology reading, I'd probably say this would be a pretty helpful thing for you. And she's like, I just bought it. It looked beautiful. Sometimes we're already kind of doing these things inherently.
Yeah, which is the best thing whenever that happens, right? I mean, that's what we would hope for ourselves, is that that intuition is kicking in to a degree that we are living in alignment with our own vibration. I mean, whenever we get those little signposts, it's like, keep going, keep going. But yeah, sometimes we don't even know that we're getting that like kind of green light to keep going. And that's where this tool, I think, is so important, because it just brings us back into self-awareness. And that's what we're all here to do, is the inquiry.
Yes. And to be validated, there's nothing like being validated on the path that you're walking.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, that's another interesting topic, is where does that validation come from, and where does your own power come from? And I mean, I love to think about that and talk about that topic also, because it within the spiritual context, because it can be very provoking, can be very agitating to have those kinds of conversations, but they're so important. And it's also like when we think about the darker sides of ourselves, or the shadow sides of who we are, and our karma and our dharma and all of our experiences. A lot of times people aren't ready to take a look at that, and that's fine too. But when we are ready, whoo,
Oh,
buckle up.
well, yeah, I just, I kind of rebranded myself recently, and I feel like the shadow is just as important as the light. And sometimes, I don't want to say more important, but that which we resist is quite often our greatest medicine. And from personal experience, I think most people want to resist that which they don't prefer,
Yeah.
just
Mm-hmm.
inherently. And that's right. Go right into that. And that's where growth is.
Yeah.
Growth needs to happen steadily to be integrated and stabilized.
Mm, yes, yes. That's the important part, is like, we have that attraction or that aversion, one or the other. And when we're like, oh, I only want to stay with the shiny, bright attraction, things that I like, things that are nice, things that are comfortable. It's like, okay, that's great, but there's never going to be any growth. There's never going to be any transformation. And yeah, but if we do decide to lean into that aversion and be like, oh, why am I so resistant to this? Or why is this causing me so much pain? Then I think it's like, okay, here we go, if we're ready. But making sure we're grounded and have other practices to help stabilize us is, yeah, imperative. Because I'm a Vata Pitta type, and I also know from experience that, and a energetic projector, that if I'm not grounded and I'm not stabilized, whew, it is not a good time.
I'm both of those, and I second that.
That's a lot of pain, but also a lot of opportunity for inquiry. Yeah, well, Tulsi, I want to thank you so much for speaking with me and sharing all of your amazing wisdom and experience. And I really admire everything you're doing. I think it's very, very cool. And I want to stay in touch, because I would love to take a workshop with you. I also am going to link in the show notes to your website and your Instagram. So if people would like to get in touch with you, they can. And I guess that's it. Do you have anything else you'd like to add or say before we sign off?
Oh, Jessica, it's just really been an honor. Thank you for all that you're doing to kind of tend to and share the light of this Vedic knowledge and embodied practice. And thank you so much for having me. It's been
Yeah,
an
you're so welcome. Thank you. And I hope you and your little puppy have an awesome day.
You too.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.
Tauzi muga adab mar divsa